Hello everyone, welcome to my first ever Twitch stream. So we're gonna look at some CSS today. For once I have a little project that I can actually showcase, which is gonna be fun because usually all my stuff is, behind NDA. I'm sure some of you developers have had the same problem, but for once I don't. We're gonna be redoing a website. So let me pull that up so you guys can see what I'm looking at. So if I cut over, this is the website we're going to be looking at today. It's the DevSpace website, and as you can see, it's functional. All the information is there. However, it's not particularly pretty. So what we're going to do is we're going to take what we have here, and we're going to jazz it up a bunch. I'll probably take multiple streams to do. We're just going to get started today. So let's take a look at the code. And what we're going to I'm going to go ahead and pull up the index.html. So what's interesting about this website, and it's been a really long time since I've seen this done, is that it is actually written in good old-fashioned SSI. So these are not actually comments. They're what's pulling in the navigation and all of that fun stuff. So it's been a really long time since I've worked on anything like that, and it was fun to see the old technology still very much works and still very much exists. And is still being used in the wild today. So the other cool thing is, because we're going to be doing a lot of CSS, is that I don't have to worry about a framework or anything like that, or a new framework to learn. We're going to be hopping right into it. So if we go back to the site really quick, there's a couple things we are going to keep, and that's the blue. Because the blue's their brand color, so we don't want to nuke that out of orbit quite yet. But for the rest, we're going to go ahead and deconstruct and then restart from the get-go. So where I like to start with my CSS is I go ahead and find where their base CSS style is and kind of look at how it's structured. So in this particular case, I'm going to go to our CSS file, which is under our styles folder. And so we have a couple different files. Obviously, they've broken it down by the components. So I'm going to look at this master file over here. And so we have some base styles, which is really cool, and which I really like, because that means that they've already got a theme going on. And so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of deconstruct that and rebuild back up again. One of the things that I'm noticing here is a lot of these things are based on ID, and so we may do some changes on that, because that's a really, really specific, and so as soon as you're going to try to override or something, we're going to have some problems, because we're reaching a really high level of specificity. So the first thing I'm going to do is try to find where that blue color is, because we definitely want that. And here it is. Here's that blue color. And so I can just kind of copy this and see if control find. Let's see if it's definitely in multiple places. We have the article H1. So that makes a lot of sense. That's probably definitely our blue. So if I go back over here and I do an inspect, I can double check that that is in fact our blue that we want to keep. And it tells me it's 3852A4, 3852A4. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And we're going to make a variable right off the top. That way we know for sure that, hey, in our body, I know for sure that that's going to be my brand color, right? So this is going to be our primary color. Or actually, we're probably going to be using it more as an accent, but that's going to be our primary color. That's going to be our primary brand color. So we're going to make a let me remember how the structure for that goes. There we go. Now it's coming back to me. I use Sass a lot, and so that's a slightly different structure. And I want to go ahead and put the pound in. There we go. So now we have that set, this will also allow us that if we decide to do a dark theme on this, it'll be super easy to decide what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. So I'm going to keep their white background, and so because I'm keeping dark theme in mind, I'm going to just call it background, and right now we're going to set that to just white and keep kind of that theme going on. And pretty much the rest I'm going to say, hey, we're going to comment all this out, and I'm not going to delete it quite yet because maybe we want to keep some of it, maybe we don't. I'm not quite sure yet, but we're going to comment all that out. So all of this stuff, and kind of see what it looks like once we've done that. So we're going to do, there we go, comment. Oh, he's got some comments in here. Well, you know what? This repo is on GitHub, so I can just use source control if I ever want to refine this. So it's going to go. So now let's go ahead and save and see what that gives us on our website now that we've pretty much gotten rid of a lot of things. What I'm trying to get to is to where we only have the base, and that did a whole lot of nothing. That is very interesting. So if you've noticed, we've deleted a bunch of stuff and yet we have nothing. So obviously we've got some styles coming from somewhere else. So let's take a look at where else we have some styles. We have some menu. So I'm going to do the same thing for their menus. They're going to go bye-bye. Now let's see where we're getting at. Should be getting rid of some styles here real soon. Oops, still not. It's really interesting. Okay. Reset CSS. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of those, so we're going to go ahead and get rid of all of that. I'm wondering if I have to restart the server to get it to take the... Let's do a hard refresh. There we go. Now we're starting to look nice and deconstructed. Because where we want to get is to get to see where our HTML is and what it's doing, because we want to make sure for accessibility purposes that we're keeping that base HTML, right? Let's continue doing some, so this is Markdown. I'm going to leave that alone because I'm not exactly sure where in the site it is, probably in the profile. I'm going to leave that one alone, but I am definitely going to be getting rid of all of the sidebar stuff. Definitely going to be getting rid of that. So now we have our home page nice and deconstructed, which should have absolutely no styles, and we can start building a theme. There we go. We can start building a theme from there. And we have a very nice idea of, this is obviously a plugin from Twitter, hence it's still being themed, but everything else is nice and reduced, right, so that we can see where we're going to go. So from there, I realized that I had a little tester thing going. We definitely don't want that, so let's get rid of that. Let's figure out where I had stuck that while I was testing to make sure that everything was working. And that, I believe, is in here. There it is. So we're definitely going to get rid of that. Okay, so let's start when we're reconstructing our theme. We're going to keep this main CSS file over here, and let's go ahead and start writing some base styles for this. I'm going to close this up to give us a little bit more room. So one of the places I always start is with my headers. So we're going to go ahead and say my H1s, H2s, H3s. Probably good enough. Once you're getting to H4, H5, and H6, we're probably getting a little bit, down the rabbit hole, and probably want to just use, not our primary color at that point. So what I'm going to do there, I'm going to set a color from and again, keeping dark mode in mind, we're just going to be using our variables. The other thing I'm going to do, and this is a personal preference, I like to set my CSS to use border box instead of content box. So I'm going to say that for the HTML, I should put it above the body. I want everything to use content box because it allows for my margins to be a lot easier to calculate. So HTML, I'm going to take everything and say I want you to use box sizing, border box, because that way I don't have to worry about my padding and margin. As you can tell, I've been using way too much Sass, trying to nest things. CSS is actually looking at that possibly coming up. I saw a post not too long ago talking about how eventually we might be able to do nesting in CSS proper, which would be super cool. I don't know how far they are in that. The other thing I'm going to do is go ahead and get rid of any margin or padding that currently exists by default on the browser. So we're going to say our body and our HTML, we're going to go ahead and get rid of our padding and margin. So we're going to say padding 0, margin 0. The other thing we want to do, so at this point, if I save this and I go back to our trusty website over here, I'm going to close this up. There we go. Now we're nice and against the edge. We're starting to look good. One of the things that we see is that we're in a serifed font, which I don't particularly care for. But I still want this to be really legible because all in all, as much as there is some level of marketing that goes into a conference website, right, where they want to be able to promote their conference, we want to make sure that it's still nice and legible, because if you don't know when the conference is or can't read the information, we're not going to be in good shape. So for now, I'm going to pick a very nice, basic, legible font, but I'm going to do a sans serif, and the reason is sans serif fonts are a lot easier to read on screen than serif fonts. And print, it's the other way around. And so I think I'm going to pick, let's see from these presets if there's anything fun. Verdana is nice and legible. I also really like Arial. I also really like Arial and Helvetica. So what we're going to do is we're just going to swap these because I'd much rather have a Helvetica first. There we go. There we go. And we're going to go ahead and save that and see what that gives us with our typeface. There we go. So now we have something nice and legible. For our headers, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, I don't know at this particular point in time, but what I'm going to do is ask them what typeface this is to see if maybe we can use that. That way we can kind of dip into their brand a little bit. So let's continue writing our base. Excuse me. So our base, we've got some headers, we've got some body, right? The other piece I'm going to do is play with my line height a little bit for my paragraphs because this is really scrunched together. So I'm going to go ahead and say for my anything that's a paragraph, I really want a line height to be a little bit bright, a little bit high, a little bit more spacing in between. And so as you can see, I can put a number and I can put a unit, but if I put in a unit, that's a fixed size. So if I ever increase or decrease the size of my font inside of my paragraph, what's going to happen is it's going to keep that as a fixed spacing, which can cause some problems, especially when you're increasing the size of your text. You're going to have overlapping words, which is not ideal. So I'm going to use a variable size. I'm going to say that I want 1.5, and I'm not going to put a unit. By not putting a unit, CSS is smart enough to understand that that means that our size is going to be relative to whatever that font size is, and it's going to correctly scale when I increase the font of my paragraph size for whatever reason I may do that. All right, so we still have links that we need to style a little bit. So see, we have links here that are very much not styled. So we're going to go ahead and do that, and we'll do buttons while we're at it. So I'm going to take my A link and A visited. And this is a really good time to go ahead and use their color, right? This is a great place to go ahead and include their brand color. So I'm going to say color is my var primary. And I'm going to go ahead and remove the underline when we're just in the middle of text. So I'm going to say text decoration none. But what I want to do is reinstate that on hover and on focus. And focus is really important because that means that when a user tabs to it using a keyboard, they're going to get the same effect as if they were hovering on it with a mouse, which is incredibly important for assistive technologies. So we're going to say when you hover or focus, I want that text decoration to be back. So we're going to go ahead and do that underline. The other thing I'm going to do so that it's nice and visible in the text is I'm going to give it a font weight bolder. I'm going to bold. That way it's really nice. It'll pop in the middle of the text a little bit more so it's not overwhelming, but it's definitely there. Now you see when I take my mouse and I hover over it, we can see there's a line versus when I don't. The other thing is when I tab to it, we can see that now our links, I definitely have a line underneath. I also have this purple box. This is actually the system doing it. We can squash that if we want to. I'm not a big fan of squashing it because a lot of people do rely on that. But we could if we wanted to. I'm going to leave it for the time being. But that's actually the system putting that purple box on there. And depending on your browser and your computer settings, it may not be purple. It could be some other color. Let's go ahead and, do we have any buttons we can look at? Yeah, we have our button right here. We have our fields and our buttons. So let's go ahead and style the button. So if I look at their logo really quick to kind of get an idea of how to style their button, they've got some curves and they have some very small edges. So we could go two kind of directions with this. We could go ahead and curve our corners on our buttons, or we could keep them hard edges. Their previous design was very, very square and very, very hard. I think we can soften it just a little bit. So let's go ahead and say that we're going to have our button. And I want to go ahead and restyle anything that's button. And I'm also going to do a class of button so that in the event that we should have a link that is something that is functionally a link, but we would want it to look like a button, we can go ahead and do that. So let's write some base styles related to that. So we're going to do a background of none, because it has that gray background by default, right? So we could actually, you know what, I'm going to do a background of primary. We're going to use our primary color for this. Eventually, I think I'm going to give them an accent color as well. I'm kind of thinking purple, because we can do what's interesting about their theme is that their theme is very space oriented. We have this little, rocket, dev space. It's in Alabama. They have got a space center not very far, so it's kind of leaning into that. And so with purple and nebulas and stuff, it could be really cool. I haven't chosen that purple quite yet. I need to find one that works well with their blue. And then we're going to give them a border solid on PX. I'm going to go ahead and make that one transparent for the time being. That way, if we ever want to play with borders, we have it, and it's not going to mess with our layout. And RGBA. There we go. So we're going to go ahead and save that. And so we're starting to have, now obviously it's completely non-readable, right? So we're going to have to go ahead and give that a foreground color on the text. And so what I'm going to do is, again, thinking about the possibility of a dark theme in mind, I'm going to go ahead and call that my primary contrast, right? So anytime that I use a primary for whatever reason, I know that I can write text that is going to work, and that's going to be visible. So I'm going to use white for now because it's nice, dark blue. And so my color is going to be our primary contrast. There we go. Now we also need to give it some padding because it's kind of squished. And so I'm going to use an interesting, some of you may have never seen these units before, so I'm going to explain them. They're really convenient. I'm going to say, in my height, I want 2EX, and for the width of my padding, I want 2CH. EX is relative to the height of the letters, and CH to the width of the letters. So whatever font size you're using inside of your button, the sizing of the padding is going to be scale in directly with whatever the font inside of it is, which is really cool. So if did I save it? Yes, I did save. There we go. So we're starting to have a button. So I think we're going to go ahead and soften it and go ahead and give it some border radius. Border radius, I'm going to use just 4 pixels. We don't want it completely huge. I'm not trying to make it circular or anything. And the other thing I'm going to do is the thing with buttons is see how the text is a little bit smaller than the rest. I'm going to go ahead and boost that to 1 rem. So font size 1 rem. So it's relative to whatever the base size is, which we didn't set. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And we're going to say font size. I'm going to do a default of 16. That's kind of, the web standard. That way we're cool across our devices and across our browsers. So now we're really starting to have something nice. But if you notice, if I hover over this, we don't have my buttons. I have hovers. We're good. But this one doesn't have a hover quite yet. So let's go ahead and fix that. I'm also noticing that these headers have font sizes coming from somewhere. We'll have to figure out where that's coming from. So let's go ahead and do our hover. So again, I added this class button in case we ever have a link that we want to act the same way as a button. So we'll definitely want to do it for that as well. So again, I'm doing the hover and focus, same as with the link, because we want to make sure our assistive technologies can do that well. There you go. So on hover and on focus, I'm trying to think of what we want to do. We could darken the blue, we could change it, but the big thing is we don't want to just use color. The advantage of taking the same color and contrasting it is that at that point it's a contrast difference, it's not just a color difference. So that might work. The other thing, there's a number of things we could do. I think for now I'm going to go ahead and lighten it just a tad because it's already quite dark. I think going darker is not going to be very easy to see. So if we take our primary, I'm going to go ahead and copy that, and I'm going to go ahead and do a primary hover. So in the instance that we're hovering, what do we want to do with it? And this is really cool because I have this little extension. There we go. And so I can just go ahead and I'm keeping the same hue. I'm not moving anything. Oh, there it went. I'm not moving anything on this slider over here, right? Because I want to keep the same hue. I'm just lightening the color just a tad. So we're going to go for something. And we don't want to go too far or we'll have to go ahead and the white will no longer pass color contrast. So we don't want to go too light. We just want to give it just a hair. So there we go. Let's save that. And then we can go ahead and say that we want, in the event of a hover over focus, we want a background of our primary hover. So, let's see what that does. And now when I hover over it, we get the nice little hover going on. The other thing I'm going to do is see how for some things we get cursor changes, but we don't for buttons, where I'm going to go ahead and give it, for lack of a better term, I'm going to give it the finger. I'm going to give it that cursor pointer thing so that it's really very evident that this is a clickable button. And there's a slew of different cursors, as you can see from the drop down, and we're going to use pointer because it's the one that makes sense in this context. Some of you may remember, once upon a time in a faraway place, I had a MySpace page and I had a fancy cursor with all sorts of different things. Thankfully, Facebook has lost my data since, so those days of terrible design will never haunt me. So now that we have that, what I am noted, it's not necessarily evident here because this doesn't have a disable, but if I went ahead and disabled this button, you would see that we're still going to have the hover effect and we're still going to have the same color. So we definitely want to be able to disable a button, right? And it should look disabled. So what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to we're going to do a couple things. I'm going to move some things. Some things won't change. So for example, the fact that we have padding, a border radius, and a font size, whether we're disabled or not, those things are going to stay put. However, our background, our color, and our border may or may not change, right? So what I'm gonna go ahead and do for our border, I'm gonna go ahead and keep that border, but I'm simply gonna do it this way. And then here I can say I want that border color, and we're only setting it once. There we go. Now, at this point, what I want to do here is say, hey, I want this to happen only when we're not disabled. So now this theme, this background color, this color, and this border color is only going to happen when we're not disabled. Oops. There we go. Not disabled. And same idea with our hover and our focus. We don't actually want a hover or a focus. So we can keep chaining these. Not. I'm going to do it here. So we want a not disabled. The voice from beyond. My voice from beyond is telling me don't forget to check my chat, which I'm assuming means I have chat messages. Well, hello! Hi guys. Hi Cassandra. How's it going? Hello, hello, hello. Thank you, voice from beyond, telling me to check my chat. That's what happens. I don't know about you, but when I'm in the when I'm in the zone coding, a lot of times I don't like the rest of the world is kind of not there. Just kind of disappears and vanishes. So you'll have to poke at me. So let's continue. No, I lost my train of thought. Let's see. It's awesome though. Do ask questions, do interact. I totally appreciate it. That's why I'm doing this. Oh right, we were dealing with disabled. That's what we were doing. Okay, so we have our not disabled, awesome, and we have our hover, and we're gonna do our not disabled here as well. Now this may or may not, for a link, it doesn't necessarily affect them because you can't just disable a link. But there we go. And there we go. There we go. So now, even though so if I were to go ahead and make this button disabled, let's go ahead and just do that in the tools. Because we do that. And eventually for UX purposes, what we'll want to do is, since you totally need an email and a first name and last name to an email to register for the mailing list, what we'll do is we'll make that disabled if the form doesn't validate. So we're going to add an attribute of disabled and see what that looks like. So now we can see that, hey, look, we have a button. Our hover didn't go away, however. So let's figure out why our hover didn't go away. Ooh, the font for the DevSpace logo is in the chat. Okay, so let's find out where the font is. Berlin Sans. Okay. So I'll have to go look that up. Is that font on Google Fonts by any chance? Because if it is, we'll definitely want to go ahead and pull that in and do some fun stuff with that. Well, let's find out now that we have. So it's Berlin Sans. So let's look into that. Google Fonts. Available font size. No, I don't want PT Sans. That's not what we want. So I really like this website because it allows me to find my fonts without, let me double check that I'm spelling it correct. So it is like this. Because fonts, just like many things, have licenses. It is here. And so I don't have to worry about licensing in this case because it will tell me. Yes, I want to find this one. Available from these. Okay. It's sending me somewhere else. Sending me to a Foundry. Okay. So I will have to figure out what the licensing for putting that on the web is, because it is definitely not a run-of-the-mill can use on the web. There's some licensing considerations here, so we're not going to just put it in today because I need to look that up. Okay, so back to this guy. We still have a hover, so let's find out why we still have a hover. So our hover, not disabled. Oh, because I have extra parentheses. No. Button, hover, not disabled, hover, not disabled, focus. Interesting. Why is it not doing what I think it should? Well, we're definitely missing that, but that's not the issue. Button. Okay. Let's go ahead and figure that out. Okay. Refresh. There we go. So did we kill our hover? Nope, still not. Oh, we're not disabled right now, so that's definitely part of the reason. Disabled. Now we're disabled. And we did in fact kill a hover. Because it's disabled. I mean, we faked the disabled, but it's disabled, so we are all set. So let's go ahead and deal with our input fields where we're dealing with form typey things. So for our input fields, what we're going to do is very, very similar. We're going to do our base style, and then we're going to go ahead and add hovers and focuses. So we're going to say input text area, because those are going to be more or less the same. Our selects fall in that category. And we're going to give them, for starters, we're going to give them a border color. So we kind of have to decide on a border color. So I'm going to say my border color is going to be probably some type of gray. So I'm going to start with white, and then I'm going to use that color picker thing I have to pick something that's a little bit not white. So I'm going to go down in the gray. Something not too light, but also not too heavy. Let's see if we actually go into that blues kind of hue color space and see if maybe we can give it a hint of blue. Let's give it just a hint. And keep that theme going a little bit. Not much, because we definitely want to use that blue for hovers and focuses, so not too much. But that gives it a hint, so let's see what that looks like. So if I go over here and I say, I want those to have a border, solid, 1px. I'm going to use our newfound border color. The other thing I'm going to go ahead and do is, just like last time, we wanted to soften it a little bit. We're going to do that here too. 4px. And, I mean, our fields are really small, right? They're really narrow if we look at them here. So I'm going to go ahead and increase the size, like the padding on that. So we're going to say padding, and we're going to use that CHEX trick again. 2EX, 2CH. I'm going to save that and see where we're at. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So that's starting to look like something. We've got our, I'm going to close this for now. We've got some stuff going on. It's trying to autofill on me. That's awesome. So that's a good thing because we definitely want that autofill to be available for people. So we're in pretty good shape here, but we need hovers again. Hovers and focuses, same idea. I feel like I say that a lot. Input, hover, input, focus. So when I go ahead and lay out my document, I tend to, in order to keep track that I have everybody, like because over here I've got 1, 2, 3, right? What I'm going to do is do input, hover, input, focus, and then text area. And that way I'm sure I haven't forgotten anybody. And I have it hovers and focuses on everywhere. Focus and then select hover and select focus. And so we're going to go ahead and give them our border color of primary. Border color, because I don't want to edit it in any way. Like I'm happy with the size, I'm happy with everything. The only thing I want to change is the color. Bar primary. There we go. And so now, and again, I almost forgot. We want to go ahead and do that whole if it's not disabled, right? Disabled. Because if it's disabled, we definitely don't want to mess with it. We don't want those hovers and focuses. Mass edit. Guys, not disabled. Okay. So now, let's go ahead and save and see what that looks like. A hard refresh. It made them all blue. Why did it make them all blue? Oh, I'm missing a hover over here. That's why it made them all blue. There you go. And now we can see, and if I tap through them, right, so if I click in here and I tap through them, we still have this outline, and that's coming, again, that's coming from my system. So I'm actually, in this particular case, I am going to go ahead and get rid of that outline. And so for input, text area, and it is a legitimate outline, and select, I'm going to outline none. Let's see if that, sometimes we have to go a little bit more aggressive with it. This should do the trick. Yep, this did the trick. There we go. So now we have that following our nice, and if I type in there, we're still in Helvetica, which is cool. Now, there is a little thing about text area on certain browsers, Safari being one of them, where text area for some reason doesn't take the default typeface. So even though I set a default typeface up here, text area is going to end up using a like monospace weird thing in some browsers. So the same way I set all of my other variables, I'm going to go ahead and set our font family there, because in case we ever want to change it, that's one of those things that I don't want to have to go find everywhere in the code to go ahead and save. So we're going to go ahead and make that a variable as well. So I'm going to copy that. We're going to call that our font family. And we're going to go ahead and paste that. And now I do want, we're going to do these at the HTML. Yeah, this body's fine. But so over here, this is getting set before, because I'm also setting it on the HTML. So we're going to leave that hard-coded, but we're definitely going to have that here. Copy, and then go bring that down to the bottom. And we're going to go ahead and say, hey, you guys, just for good measure, please make sure you're using what I intend you to use. There we go. And so in those variables, you guys can put whatever you want, which is kind of cool. Alright, so that shouldn't have changed anything because I'm in Chrome right now. So it really shouldn't have changed anything about our stuff. Okay. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and make our disabled now. Might as well. That way it exists. And so the same way we have, the same way we did before where we kind of set the base and then we handled, you know, individual use cases, I'm going to do the same thing. So we definitely have our hover and focus. We definitely have, oh, I have this twice. We definitely don't need to do that twice. There we go. What we can do is go ahead and pick out what is going to be standard across all of our use cases and then go ahead and specifically handle disabled. So versus not. So we're going to go ahead and say our disabled is going to go ahead and have, actually in this use case we're just going to override because it's going to be easier just to override. The thing to keep in mind though is because there's, unlike buttons where you may have 3 or 4 different styles, it's very rare to have several different styles of input and selects and stuff. So I'm just going to go override, because we're not going to end up in a situation where we're overriding the override of the override of the override. So I'm just going to, because this is after this and this is more specific because it's disabled versus not, right? This has one more, that's a higher level of specificity. I can just go ahead and reassign the same things or the same properties, and it's going to take the highest level of specificity as long as it matches. So the big thing we're going to want to do is, I am going to specify that I do not want a background on here, just in case there's a browser, because I got rid of the reset CSS, right? So you do have to contend with those a little bit. So I'm going to do a background of, I'm going to take that same disabled. What disabled? Oh, I'd use for the button I left it be the default, the browser default. So I'm going to let the browser do that as well here. So I'm going to say background initial. And then I'm going to go ahead and set our border color to initial. And this should take what the device or browser had in mind from the very beginning. So if I do an inspect, and I go ahead and add to this input field a disabled element, just like we did last time to make sure that it works. Add attribute disabled. It kept our border color, but it definitely graded out, but not a whole lot, which is fine, but it kept our border color. So let's go ahead and make sure we set our border color to something. Let's go ahead and do a disabled border, and I'm going to do a kind of run-of-the-mill gray, right? So if I do gray, go pick a run-of-the-mill gray. What does that pan out to be? Please. Yeah, that's not bad. There we go. And so now we can say, there we go. Okay, so we've handled our input fields. As far as I know, there's no radio buttons or checkboxes to contend with. If there are, we'll handle those when we find them. There might be somewhere, but we'll handle those where we find them. So we have a basic theme going on now. We've based it on the blue. We've got some colors. We've got some basic typography. I'm still curious as to where our sizes are coming from here. H2 user agent. Nope, we're good. They just seem small to me. Okay. Inspect, and that's part of our header. Perfect. Cool. So now we can start styling. So and start our layout. Because we have a nice fresh base for what we're looking at. We have a nice brush, so even if I go on our various different pages, we can see that we're not getting everything looks nice and consistent. It doesn't look great yet, but it does look nice and consistent, and so we can go ahead and start getting that, you know, nicely styled at that point and laid out to something that is more of a, you know, not just a dump of HTML. That is so that's going to be, I think, a different stream. We've done a lot today, and I'm going to go ahead and save these changes and commit them, and that way we can go ahead and continue. And I like to take these in strides, and that by then I'll have figured out probably what to do with this typeface to see if we can get a license, or if we're going to use something similar, because a lot of times what you can do if you can't use that specific one, you can find something that's similar enough, close enough, or go the opposite direction where you're like, okay, that's the typeface in my logo, I'm going to use something very different so we can give it a little bit of contrast. And probably look for a purple that we can use for some stuff. Maybe purple, maybe green, not sure yet, although blue-green, you know, we'll see. So that's kind of how I start with projects. Generally try to figure out what to do and kind of bring it to its bare bones so we can reconstruct and start back up. So that is, with that, I'm going to double check the chat. Thank you all for coming, and I will see you again very, very soon.